Hey, everybody. We're 2 minutes late, which is actually kind of better than I thought based on the whole comedy that was trying to get me to my computer as I was trying to drive across town in bad weather and a lot of nervous Memphis drivers who don't know what to do when it rains. Anyway, we're here. So it's Elissa Taub, myself, Ari Sauer, for our weekly live stream to talk about immigration news. And there has been, as there will be, for this whole administration, because it is just all drama all the time with this crew, like it or not. So, Elissa, I was thinking the weirdest immigration news of the week involved South Africa.
Oh, right.
We didn't talk about that to prepare for the call, and I was just like, so I was talking to somebody today from South Africa. And it's like, how does that work? On there, how do I get this refugee status that the president's promising me? So just to give people a little background on this, President Trump basically tried to end the refugee program, on the day one of his administration, and he is pretty much frozen. A lot of people that were coming into the United States were on the verge of coming in, haven't been able to come in, and we haven't heard that much from him since then about refugees, which the U.S. is one of the, is the largest recipient of refugees through the UN program in the world. And we're the ones that actually invented the refugee program after World War II. So for President Trump to, he did something very similar in his first term. And he basically, there were a few refugees that were admitted in his term, but it was a trickle. So we kind of a thought that we wouldn't hear anything about refugees again for a while. And then this week, President Trump he did it as an executive order, I guess, as is usual, where he laid into the South African government and which is, I guess it's mostly Black Africans that are in the government, saying that Afrikaners, which is actually a subset of white South Africans, have been persecuted. Their land's been taken away. I mean, there've been a lot of, and they're, I'm not taking any positions on any of that stuff, but it was just weird that he said that group, they should get refugee status, not all the other groups that around the world that we had already been vetting for the last several years to and have been waiting in camps and kind of coming along. So the answer on that, and I talked to somebody in refugee processing, and how would that work with this completely new population that no one is that probably doesn't want to actually live in refugee camps, and probably and they're fairly so doesn't the UN administer this? Does the UN actually think these people should qualify? And it was like, we have no idea on this. This kind of caught us by surprise. We have no idea how they would admit these people. Maybe they'll admit them in a parole program.
Well,
which the president.
I think that the executive order said something like, once refugee admissions begin again, that the U.S. would prioritize refugee admissions for this group of South Africans. But I don't think it created any new pathway for them or said that they could come here immediately. It was sort of like, yeah, we stopped refugee admissions and at some point we'll restart it. And when we do, these people get to go to the front of the line. But there's no meat on those bones in terms of what the actual procedure would look like.
Right. And I mean, I know even though immigration lawyers don't have a lot to do with refugee admissions, I know a little bit about it because I was on a board of a refugee organization for a number of years, and I know people that work in the field, and it is done in close partnership with the United Nations, refugee admissions. So the UN does a lot of the initial clearing, and then they refer them to different countries that are willing to take different populations, and then non-government organizations take over. It's not done by the State Department. It's done by World Relief and HIAS and all these other organizations that are out there that do wonderful work. And none of them actually have, a setup to basically just suddenly shift and prioritize and work on that population. Nor I'm not sure that they would want to, because I'm not sure they would consider that population to be eligible for it based on the UN, especially but the UN actually has to support it. And a lot of people are concerned is like, would Trump pull out of UN treaties involving refugees just to make a point here? And so there's like a lot of sort of further more serious questions, and I hope that that's not what's going to happen. And honestly, I mean, I don't have a problem with South Africans coming here, white South Africans coming here. I'm not sure I have a problem with them potentially. I mean, if they can make the case that they have been discriminated against on the count of their being a member of that ethnic group, then okay, they should have the ability to apply for that like any other group on there. It's just weird the whole way the whole thing is played out. It sort of like makes me wonder, is like, does Elon have something to do with that, since he's part of that group? Although I don't think he's African. I don't know if he's Afrikaner or
He's
not.
not, actually. His family came to, I believe his family came to South Africa from elsewhere in Europe. But,
yeah, I mean, there were a lot of immigrant groups. There's Italians and Jews and all kinds of other white South Africans. So are all those other groups not having the same issues, and why aren't they? I mean, I don't know. I'm ignorant. I'm ignorant on domestic politics there, so I have no room to speak. But I guess we'll have to watch that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's some, there were other things going on in the news. I guess yesterday we got another birthright citizenship case in not Boston. There was like 4 of them, I think. This was the one. There was a Boston, a New Hampshire, a Maryland, and a Seattle case. And the other 3 have come up. Trump is 0 for 3 on those, and now he's 0 for 4 with the latest one. So I know a lot of people are worried about that coming back somehow. That's one I'm not too worried about. It's going to be, and I don't actually think the Supreme Court, as much as people think they're in Trump's pocket, are going to touch that particular issue. So, I don't expect it's probably going to be any better on appeals. By the time it got to the Supreme Court, well, first of all, I don't think the Supreme Court will take the case on there. I think they will decide that that's not the one that they want to be remembered for on there. So they will probably deny cert, and it'll stay denied at the circuit court level. We will see, but that's the good news on that. There was a court decision today, Elissa, you and I were talking about this earlier this evening, that was a win for Trump. I think it's his first one. He's like 9-1 now, and it's not a big win for him, because the reason why he won may be easy to remedy in another court. But this is the one. It's not an immigration order, but it affects immigration potentially, where federal employees have been offered a buyout, basically paying them 8 months salary or 9 months salary if they give their notice. I love how like Trump acts like this is free. Like, taxpayers are going to have to pay all these people's salaries and on there. So it's like, who's paying for that? It's just free money. I think he thinks a lot of things are free money, like tariffs are free money, taxes are free money, and they don't actually have anything behind them. But that matters potentially for immigration. We were talking like, it's not really super clear what the agencies are that are covered by that. There was there's something about immigration enforcement not being a part of that. But you were telling me you thought that the immigration courts were covered by it, and all those immigration judges have an incentive that have been wanting to get out, while they're going is good from this administration, might see that.
I heard that. I think I heard that. Now they're unionized, so I think there was an issue there that the union was telling folks not to accept. And I think that, and maybe it was rescinded. I don't recall the details, but I think I mentioned to you, I'm concerned that, for example, my biggest fear with the hiring freeze overall and with these buyouts has been with the Department of Labor. And my concern is that, right now, perm processing times are just so long. And if people take the buyout, if they, they're not an immigration enforcement agency. Yep. Prevailing wages, there won't be enough people to do them. And we're already seeing 17, 18 month processing times on perms. And if we lose examiners and they can't replace them, that's a really big problem for the green card flow in the United States. I mean, the issuance, the ability of people who are just entering that system to ultimately get their green cards is going to be really hampered. And it's going to potentially, because we already see it happen, it's pushing a lot of people to want to file like EB1 petitions who maybe aren't the best candidates for EB1s, but they want to get out of these lengthy processing times and backlogs on the EB2 or EB3 side of things. So like it has ramifications beyond just, oh, the perm might take longer. And of course, the folks that are making these decisions, you know, at DOGE, or they don't know any of this stuff. So, but the permutations of this could be, you know, pretty large.
Hopefully, if any of you work for Tesla or work for, you know, any of these Elon groups, make sure you complain a lot to the higher ups about what this is doing for your perm applications and your green card applications, et cetera. So that's something to keep an eye on. There's a you know, there's a lot of other ones with this dismantling of the federal government that they're interested in that could also impact immigration processing. Even when they claim agencies are exempt, it's not always so clear that they are. And they also just a lot of people wanting to leave government right now in general on there. Just expect headaches. Consular processing as well. Last time was a disaster, not just because of hiring freezes and because of other things that were going on, but just a lot of foreign service officers quit in 2017, 2018, and that caused big backlogs in at U.S. consulates. So I tell people sort of the same warning we were giving people last time. Travel is something that you should not be doing. You should at least be heavily considering domestic travel if you have choices, like you're going on vacations and things like that. Have your have relatives come here instead if they, of course, they might not be able to get visas on there, but just be super cautious because especially if you have an expiring visa. If you have to, right now, I'm just not that confident that the consulates are going to stay normal for much longer, but we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, Elissa, what are some of the other things that we were chatting about other than tacos and ganas?
Our local immigration raids. I wanted to mention about the Visa Bulletin. The March Visa Bulletin came out yesterday, and I did my deep dive on that today. And the biggest story out of the March Visa Bulletin, which dovetails also with a potential looming government shutdown next month. I'll mention a little bit about that as well. But the big story out of the March 2025 Visa Bulletin is significant retrogression in the EB4 category. And EB4 covers religious workers, special immigrant juveniles, like some other folks. It's kind of like this weird catch-all category where when the government didn't know where to put certain classes of immigrants, like special people, they kind of like just threw them all into EB4. And the retrogression is a full like 17 months back to, I think it's April or August of 2019. The State Department in the Visa Bulletin actually warns that the category could even become unavailable as soon as April because there's, according to them, been high demand in the category, and the government has been really efficient at issuing visas in the category since the beginning of the fiscal year in October. And they say that even with the statutory requirements that they only issue, so many every quarter of the fiscal year, that they're still running up against the limits that are in place this year. So EB4 is a category to watch closely. I'll mention about the religious workers in a second, but in terms of the other categories in the Visa Bulletin, most family-based categories are staying the same between February and March. There's like very small movement for, I think it's F3 and F4 for nationals of the Philippines. I think
that's for approval. That's for
approval. Yeah, the final action date. The dates for filing haven't really moved at all. That's all final action. And on the employment-based side, there's some modest movement around EB2 and EB3, no movement really in the EB1 for China or India. And there are some, like I said, some modest movement in the other categories on the final action charts. The filing dates charts stayed the same. That's not a surprise to me. And then the other thing I want to mention is USCIS, just like for February, for March, we can only use the final action chart to file adjustment of status applications. For family-based cases, we can still use the dates for filing chart to file adjustment of status applications. I expect that decision on the employment-based side to require us only to use the final action charts for submitting applications, that's going to continue through the rest of this fiscal year. Basically, they let us file more applications at the beginning of the fiscal year, and then halfway through, they kind of shut us down and say, okay, we have too much demand, too many cases filed. We're going to pull back and really focus on the cases that can be approved in this fiscal year. So that's kind of where things are with the visa bulletin.
That's not specific to the administration.
That's a continuing on.
That's not a Trump thing. That's normally how they work. Is we don't see movement till the end of the fiscal.
That's a continuation of the prior administration's policy on the visa bulletin. What is weird is the EB4 retrogression, and especially at this point in the year, and the fact that they're saying that category might become completely unavailable as early as April. That is very unusual, and I do believe that there's some kind of political decision making behind that. At the same time, the religious worker category in the EB4 is going to sunset on March 14th, which is the expiration date on the current continuing resolution that is keeping the U.S. government open. And unless the government actually acts, unless Congress acts to come to some budget decision or pass another continuing resolution that gets us beyond March 14th, that category will sunset because it only gets extended by act of Congress with the budget year. So
that's what they're tied in with. They're tied in with doctors and E-Verify, and between those three, this has been the story for about 15 years now with these short extensions. EB4, I think you're onto something, Elissa, about it being political, and because there are some unpopular groups on the for special immigrant juveniles, for example, in that category. But I believe that this is going to be one that is going to eventually percolate up and become an emergency in the White House, because the Catholic Church, Orthodox Jewry, there's a lot of foreign clergy that are in the United States that are keeping congregations going, that without these foreign these foreign religious workers, that they would have a, actually the Catholic Church has a really big problem right now, because I thought it was something like 40% of all Catholic priests in the country are in this situation. So there are potentially a lot of congregations around the country that are in trouble if these priests, because they only get 5 years on the on an R1 visa, and they now that they're backed up to 2019, which is 6 years, they're all hitting the end of the line. Even if they extend the EB4 category, which I believe they will, but that's a sort of a side issue. If they don't fix this issue right now and allow R1s to either, they have choices. They could allow people to file adjustments early. They could figure out, they could amend the law and allow R1s to work for longer and do something like they did for H1s, where they could work as long as necessary until their category is current. But they have got to do something, because in the next few months, we're going to see a lot of congregations around America lose their clergy. And I can promise you that the phones on Capitol Hill are going to go bananas when that starts to happen. And a lot of those churches and a lot of those congregations and all the other religions are full of Trump voters who are thinking, why is this happening? Even though Trump did not create this problem on there. This problem started a long time ago on here, but it's getting a lot worse now. So it has to do with Biden's changing the way numbers were counted, so that they ended the distinction between all the EB4 categories. But I have a feeling they're going to do something like a parole in place program for clergy, because they're going to feel like that is the only thing that they have the ability to do on their own. And that's going to be super ironic, because they don't like these parole programs for classifications or groups of people. But this is going to be the one that's going to force their hand.
Well, and I think this is happening at a time where we're also seeing greater scrutiny of R1 applications by priests and other clergy, where we're seeing consular officers really question people about their knowledge of the religion, because they're concerned about fraud and whether these people are really priests and all of this. And I'm sure that there are reasons why that those things are happening, right? I don't want to pretend that like there's no fraud in the system. But to your point, Greg, congregations are already feeling the heat from their clergy, having a harder time getting visas to come to the United States in the first place. Then you have folks who are already here who are in this green card backlog. And so you can't bring in the new people even to replace the old people, because the government is throwing up these roadblocks for clergy. And so I do think that that is a looming issue, and hopefully there will be some outcry from various religious denominations that normally are in good graces with this administration, in terms of their level of support. So
I want to show you guys. I want to show you something cool. If I can do a present on here. Hang on one second. Share screen.
While you're pulling up, I just want to add that also, a lot of those of us that represent religious workers, that represent houses of worship and religious programs, are backing away from the EB4 religious worker petitions, and where possible choosing to do more EB3, EB2 petitions, using the PERM process, labor certification process, as well as also, using the H-1B programs, in addition to the R1s. Yeah. Under the assumption that in case this doesn't change, there's a plan to deal with it.
Yeah, the only reason I'm showing this is because it was something I'm playing with. This is I asked OpenAI's deep research tool, and I've been using that. I mean, I'm talking about that a little bit on LinkedIn this week. This is the OpenAI tool that is not it's not part of ChatGPT yet. It's part of their more experimental and more expensive product that we're using with the AI company, basically to kind of like see what's coming in the model on there. But I just asked it to, I actually was in the process of going through a much broader analysis, but I asked it to like look at last month's visa bulletin, this month's visa bulletin, and kind of give me a quick summary on how the categories are changing on there. But I also want to use this to like basically say, give me a year by year, graph showing me whether it's getting slower, faster, and all of that. But I just thought this was interesting that it had the, laid it out nicely like this for a task like that. It's really come a long way.
I'm afraid to ask how long it took you to get it, like to figure out the prompt and get it to give you that.
Oh, not long at all on there. I just basically told it, I said, I want you to do a comparison. And it asked me sort of like, do you want this laid out in a table? I said, sure. On there. It really was.
I did it by hand today, and it took me like maybe 20, 30 minutes to go through it by hand. And then I wrote it up. But because I haven't been able to find the right prompt. So anyway, that's an aside. We can talk about that offline. But I was like,
I'm closing the screen. I just thought it was something that people would find interesting on there. Moving along on there. So, there was an interesting development this morning on the enforcement side of things, where Trump is already firing senior people. This time it was the top 2 officials at ICE. Were shown the door, and they've been less than a month after, 3 weeks, I guess, after that they were in office on there. I don't even know how long it's been since their appointments were done, but he just felt like they weren't scared, they weren't shocking and awing enough. And Tom Homan, who's been their big spokesman for months on enforcement and what was coming, is out. They say they're being reassigned. I have no idea what that means. It seems could be reassigned to.
One went to DC and one was sent back up to some field office in St. Paul, Minnesota. I don't know what's up with Tom Homan, but the other two people.
Field office. That's that.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're out. And did they say who the replacement is?
I don't recall.
They did. It was somebody from Boston.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. I forget what his name is.
Yeah. Anyway, it's sort of been a lot of there are people that are being caught up for sure. The numbers are not as many as you would think, given the headlines, as far as how many people are being arrested versus in the Biden administration and in a similar period of time. And there also have been stories about how they don't have bed space and they're releasing people after. So I feel like there's a lot of this is a lot of theater mixed in. I mean, it's unfortunate. Look, the people that are getting caught up in it that's very real for them. But I feel like for the American public, the idea is to make it seem like there's a lot more than there is, and to scare a lot of people. And we know, and unfortunately, I think they're not necessarily arresting more people, but they're disrupting a lot of life. There are a lot of schools who've seen a lot of absences. There are farms that are, there have been announcements that we're just going to let all the crops die this year. We don't have enough. That was in California, I think, with some of the orange orchards there. And there will be consequences for the, for the country, just with the stuff that's already happened, particularly with agriculture, where I think people are, there was bad inflation news already today that for the Trump administration, the biggest jump in inflation in like 18 months on there. And, they're expecting the price of a car to go up, $3,000 to $5,000 because of steel tariffs. But the agriculture is the sort of the sleeper issue. That's what people think about when they go to the grocery store every week is what does an avocado cost? What does an apple cost? And they are not going to be they are not going to be level with the rest of inflation. They're going to be going up a lot, and people are going to be mad. And hopefully the Democrats will be able to properly message and explain to people the reason why your roof costs $100,000 and the reason why your apple is, $3 or $4 an apple is because of immigration.
It's interesting. Right before the inauguration, Rolling Stone ran a great article, and a couple other outlets did too, but the Rolling Stone piece was particularly good about the propaganda war that was coming, and that, early on in the administration, there weren't going to be enough beds, all the things we were talking about, right? Not enough officers, not enough beds, not enough resources to get people into the system. And so a lot of what we were going to see is theater. And you saw that when Kristi Noem, the new DHS secretary, went down to Guantanamo to oversee the transfer of like 50 guys, 50 allegedly undocumented folks who were brought to Guantanamo, and she's down there in her jeans and her hair, they're taking all these pictures and she wants to look rugged and all this stuff. And, she went to New York, to be there for a quote unquote raid, which was a pre-planned thing. So and you saw Dr. Phil out, broadcasting from, so you're seeing a lot of this happen specifically for TV media. And unfortunately, a lot of people get taken in by that, but the numbers belie the fact that the facts aren't matching up with what the propaganda is. And eventually that might catch up, right? Eventually we might see, as there are more officers, they were talking this week about deputizing IRS officers and all of this kind of stuff. So eventually, we might see the actual impact of what they want to do. But for right now, a lot of it's for show. And the interesting thing for me about the article this week about the IRS officers was, you might recall a few years ago, I think it was maybe in the Infrastructure Act or one of the Biden administration's big pieces of legislation, they funded, the addition of however many more IRS officers that the agency could hire to assist with the flow of taxes and auditing and making sure people were paying their fair share and all of that. And the right wing went crazy. They're deputizing, they're weaponizing the IRS. They're going to go after people with the IRS. They're hiring these officers so they can come after you, better go buy your guns and all this stuff. And now they're doing it. They're actually trying to deputize IRS officers to do immigration raids.
Can I also tell you something that I would tell our audience something that a lot of immigration lawyers know that the public might not know, which is that a lot of people will come to us and say, like, I know I have to like pay. Do I have to pay taxes? And we say, yes, you have to pay taxes. And it's like on there, if a person comes to us and they've been working under the table, and how they pay taxes is they don't have a real Social Security number, so they will get a taxpayer ID number and they will pay their taxes, so that one day when they want to, when they have an opportunity to become an immigrant, will have paid their taxes and they'll be eligible to immigrate on there. But that's sort of, and I also tell people, it's like, well, won't they'll ask, like, what happens when the IRS finds out, will they look into me? Will they, come after me? And that answer has always been no, because the IRS has one goal, and their one goal is to collect money, to collect as many tax dollars as they can for the American public. That is their job. And now, that it's suddenly become apparent that that is over, and that the IRS will come after people that it has information on in its system. That, I think, a lot of people don't appreciate how many billions of dollars get paid into the Treasury every year by people with taxpayer ID numbers that are just trying to pay their taxes. They're trying to be follow the law as much as possible. And people aren't going to pay if they're afraid that that's going to be what's going to ultimately lead to their being deported on there. The other thing I think J.D. Vance had done something about it this week as well regarding Social Security funds and how much, or Elon was talking about how much fraudulent money there's. It's like, what he didn't say, and what our immigration lawyers also know, is that there are a lot of people that are working under other people's Social Security numbers. Sometimes they know the people, sometimes they don't know the people, but they're doing that essentially to work and stay off the radar. And I think I had seen the figure that there was like almost $100 billion in the Social Security Trust Fund that was matched up to numbers that don't match, where they don't match correctly. And those $100 billion are never going to be collected because they were paid in by people who wasn't their real numbers on there. So cracking down on that practice, it's sort of like, that's what's propping up the Social Security Trust Fund right now, is a lot of that money. And It's like, be careful what you ask for, because all of a sudden, if you have, nobody's paying in to Social Security and no one's paying their taxes, because they're all afraid that these are going to lead to my quick removal. That may be, ultimately that's probably good policy at the end of the day. But when you don't have any plan B to like legalize these people and have an adequate workforce and figure out how you're going to replace this money, that's not such a great thing. So I would just say, that's a very good reason for Republicans and Democrats to come together and work out some kind of guesswork or, legalization plan for people, because that could be very, when you're doing all these things right now to disrupt the federal government, and then you're doing these things that are going to disrupt revenue to the agencies. That's that might be the time to start thinking about consequences, like what's going to happen when we lose hundreds of, at least, tens or potentially hundreds of billions of dollars. All right, Elissa, did we run out of topics, or we still have other things on your list?
That's all I got.
Ari, you're silent. Unmute.
Sorry, I don't know if you guys covered this last week, but the H-1B lottery period. So USCIS has come out and announced the dates for the upcoming lottery for H-1B. That's the registration. The dates are from March 7th to March 24th. Okay.
I have been.
Another good thing to remind people, that especially employers, that if you have employees that you want to try and sponsor for the H-1B lottery, now is time to touch base with. I've been
hearing from people in parole status and other statuses that are vulnerable, that are college grads, that are working on employment authorization documents. And, for a while, I thought that the numbers for the applicants were going to go down because of the filing, the registration fee going up to $200. But all these people that are about to lose their employment authorization documents, a lot of them are very educated and have the ability they're already working for employers that are in a position to sponsor them for H-1B. So I would bet that there won't be that much of a decline, if any, in the number of H-1B applications that get put into the registration program because of that population. Could be wrong, but
And
that's something.
The biggest numbers are used by larger companies that don't have that issue. That's not a factor there. So
yeah,
I don't see that there being a huge
decline. The Ukrainians alone, there's a very high percentage of them that have college degrees, and their employers right now know that they're going to lose these employees if they can't figure out something. So that's that group in particular, but there are others as well that are, in that group that are H-1B caliber. I think there's sort of a myth that we're thinking, that these are all people that are, that are uneducated and such. But a lot of them are, and a lot of them are working in professional positions already. I think we might start to see that as well with DACA.
A lot of DACA students, right?
Yeah.
A lot of DACA graduate, they're college graduates.
There's 200,000 healthcare workers that are on DACA, and a lot of them have degrees, that qualify.
They're doctors, yeah.
Doctors, but there's actually, I think there's not that many doctors, there's a couple hundred, but there's like 50,000
nurses, yeah.
So there's that's another one. It's like, what are you doing as far as like pushing DACA, to kill that program on there? It's like most of they're oftentimes these nurses are dealing with people that are like the most gung-ho, deport all the illegals. That's what they're pushing, and it's like at the same time they're dealing with with foreign nationals every day that they would miss. They would really be in big trouble if they all sort of disappeared overnight. So I don't know. It's like I just think that people. I posted about this on LinkedIn, a story, and I'm not going to get into too much detail because the guy's watching. But I did a consultation this week with somebody who was telling me over and over again they were a Trump voter, and they had but they wanted to sponsor this person, and this was not one of the ones that Trump swore he was only going after criminals on there, and it's like, as far as they're concerned, your significant other is a criminal on there because the person's illegal, and they consider anybody that's in illegal status to be a criminal on there. But that's that's going to be a thing, and I've heard from immigration lawyers all over where that's the case. So let's move away from the updates. We have a couple of questions. So I love America. I do. I'm glad you do, and I do too. He said USCIS is not part of the buyout as per several reports. That is correct. We don't think USCIS is part of the buyout. We're concerned, I guess, for some of the other agencies, that USCIS is one of many agencies that deal with immigration. And what we know, ICE is not part of it, and probably CBP is not part of it. So the DHS agencies are probably out. Elissa was talking before about Department of Labor, EOIR at Department of Justice. And Department of Justice, they're not exempt from this. I don't think they are.
Well,
but that's a big.
Was it confirmed that USCIS is not part of it? Because I had heard, I don't know if it was confirmed, but I heard that there were employees of USCIS that did.
I don't know. You should ask ChatGPT.
I don't know. I think that technically the immigration enforcement agencies were exempt from the buyout.
ICE is definitely not part of the buyout. CBP is not going to be part of the buyout. But I think
the issue is that USCIS is not an enforcement agency, but I have heard conflicting things, and I think they
are an enforcement agency. They have FDNS. They have enforcement functions.
Technically, they're not supposed to be. But what I was going to say is that I think what happened across the board with some of this, like even federal judges, like district court judges and stuff, got these notices. So I don't think they were particularly careful with how they sent them out. And so I do think there may be people at some agencies that shouldn't have received the offer who did. And so that may be, if there were folks at USCIS who received the buyout offer, it could have been a mistake, or it could have been that they were at an employment level that was targeted. depending on what their function is within the agency. But I don't have any specific information about that.
This is what U.S. News says on there. Well, this is what ChatGPT says, and then they cite to U.S. News. I just looked at that. So they said that it is part of the federal workforce and is therefore included in the buyout program. However, positions related to immigration enforcement are exempt. That's what you just said, Elissa. That means while USCIS is part of it, specific roles within USCIS directly tied to enforcement, like FDNS, for example, or some of the others, are not subject to buyout offers. But you are right. That means that a lot of USCIS officers could get their,
I have heard that USCIS officers got their letters. So not all of them, I'm sure, but I've heard that some have gotten letters.
I'm sometimes harsh on USCIS people. If any of them are listening tonight to this, please don't quit. We need you. You play a really important role in America. Right. You are. As mean as I am sometimes on some of the federal agencies. We need you. Please don't quit.
And we say that knowing that some of you want to take the buyout because I know that some of you went through a tough time, when this administration was here before. So hopefully we can all get through the next 4 years together.
I would also add that the times that we seem to suffer on our end of things the most is when USCIS hires new people and they're low on the training end, right? Like they're basically given their little bit of training and they're put out into the field to, out at a service center or whatever, and they're adjudicating petitions without maybe having all the info they need. And so we really need the people at the agency that have long, standing experience, who kind of get stuff, to still be there to guide some of the newbies as folks come into the agency. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. We can move on.
All right. We had another question. By the way, if anybody has a question, we probably will end a little earlier tonight, but if you have a question, post your question. If you're on LinkedIn or on X or wherever you're watching YouTube, just all you have to do is make a comment like you would normally make a comment on a social media post. We see it over here, and then we can answer that question. Otherwise, we'll answer this question, and then may call it an evening and be back next week. But Texas Cowboy Hat 3, who I like your cat.
The cat picture, yeah.
Based on Trump designating Mexican drug, this is a good question actually. Based on him designating these in the executive orders from day one. Designating drug cartels terror groups, would this allow victims of cartel violence to apply for a strong asylum case, given the cartels are now considered designated? So the answer on that is you've already been able to make asylum claims on that issue. I think that might strengthen it as far as the credibility of it. If it's a full-on terror group that's operating in an area on there, and it's always good to sort of use the words of the current administration, especially an administration that is not friendly on immigration like that. I would say I would use that if I was working on an asylum application for somebody that, that was in that situation. Now, keep in mind with asylum, there are some classes of asylum that you just have to show you're a member of a group and it flips the presumption. But that's a very limited group. So that's what they call the Lautenberg categories, where it's, Baptists and Jews from Russia, or it's Christians in Iran, or there are certain groups that are in that list. And that's being said, you still have to show you have a credible fear of persecution personally from these groups. So you can't make that claim. For example, if you're living in living in an area with a bunch of great restaurants in Mexico City, on there, you're going to have a hard time making that claim. You would want to show that your family is in an area where these groups are operating in a major way, that maybe close relatives of yours had suffered. You're going to have to get really into specifics to show that it's that you have that claim to make. So I've always expressed caution in filing an asylum claim if you don't have if you don't have that kind of evidence. But that is something that I think might strengthen those claims. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to create a situation where you have an across the board anything. I mean, it's going to make cases that are applied that are already good cases.
I have gotten questions from people.
But I think I don't think you're going to have a category across the board like that.
I mean, one of the questions
because of this change, I don't see that it's going to make that much of a difference in how these cases are adjudicated. That's what I'm saying.
Let's talk about sort of like political changes from the last few weeks and how they affect other claims. So Ukrainians, are they, some of them are like basically nervous that their TPS is not going to be extended and that their parole status is not going to be extended. And some of them I've been hearing from people that are interested in filing for asylum. Now, asylum claims, you have to show either that the government that's in office is persecuting you, or they cannot control non-government operators that are operating in your country. And in Ukraine, that would be Russian soldiers on there. And so, the easier claims to make are if you're from a part of Ukraine that is now occupied by Russia, might be easier. But, I'm not so I think you can, really, for some of these folks, the question is, can I make a decent, good faith claim for asylum right now? And then basically the claim is not going to be heard for 5 or 6 years, probably, because of backlogs right now with asylum officers who I guess are getting buyout offers too on there. And, so those cases could take even longer on there. But, so it might be beside the point of what does the current administration think of Ukraine and Russia, because it's probably going to be, the Vance or whoever administration, whoever in 2028 is, whether it's a Democrat or Republican on there. And if you can make a real claim and you have real evidence on there, I don't think I would, for asylum, especially when it's the last option available, I don't think I would worry as much about the current president as far as that claim. There's also the similar question about Venezuela right now, which all of a sudden, the Trump administration has gotten cozy with Maduro in Venezuela. And does that affect making an asylum claim there? And I think the same reasoning holds. If you can make an asylum claim legitimately and you're in that situation where your TPS is disappearing, I think you should file that claim on there at this point. And you at least, unless the laws change between now and then, you have some protections from removal if you have a pending asylum claim. And it seems like people from those two countries, there's a lot of evidence that they can use to back up their claims. So they're not fraudulent or frivolous. And I think in a lot of these cases, a lot of people have legitimate claims to make. So probably that's what to do. And it may be the same way with Mexico. I think Mexico's a little bit harder because I don't think the Mexican government, you have to make this all based on drug cartels and whether they are affecting your safety on there. And, I don't think that President Sheinbaum in Mexico is, I think she's fine on there. It's just whether she can control these groups or not.
Well, and I read today, we could have talked about this earlier, but I didn't remember it till now. But I read today that Mexico had started removing American deportees. I know that there was at least one flight from Mexico to Honduras that included people that the United States had removed to Mexico. So they seem to be, I don't know if that's a new thing or if that's a continuation of an existing policy, but if Mexico is making strides to remove folks or kind of help implement American policy, then that would maybe hurt folks' asylum claims.
Yeah. Our friend Aaron has just posted that SEVIS is operating. Well, SEVIS, I guess, is run by ICE, and they're completely exempt from this. But hopefully, the immigration agencies are not going to see too much, attrition over it, because once these people leave, there's also another well, I don't know. I heard it was from Doge. I don't know if it comes under executive order or whatever, but there's a 4-for-1 deal where you're only, for every person that, 4 people that, you can only hire one person for every 4 people that leave So once people start departing, unless they start varying from that, even if these agencies want to hire up again later on, and they're going to still have to, I mean, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, they also, yesterday, he signed an executive order that said that all agencies have to run their hiring by some kind of DOJ person. And that DOJ was basically going to have oversight over hiring for every single government agency, and that you could only hire people that were like approved by some 20-year-old kid from
Not, yeah. So, I mean, it's not totally unprecedented. Last time they had these minders in the, these minders at the White House that they were monitoring each agency to make sure that they were towing the MAGA line in, the first Trump administration. And they scared a lot of people that were working at those agencies. This time around, it seems like it's, more on there. And also, I don't think that many people lost their jobs last time as far as being fired instead of happening right now. So we will have to see. Hopefully, we'll see how the litigation works. This hiring, this judge in Boston right now who gave the Trump a win today on this issue. I do have a feeling that similar suits are going to be filed in other places because this one was filed. Trump didn't win on the merits here. They just said that the union that sued didn't have standing to sue. I'm not sure that another judge in another jurisdiction would buy that argument. And B, I'm not so sure that they can't find other plaintiffs that would better fit what the judge said, who would be parties that could sue on this. So it could be, I don't know, it could be maybe a member of Congress who is saying that you are not spending the money. I'm a member of Congress. I authorize the money to be spent on for these services to be formed, and you're not following the appropriation process and spending process. So I don't know. I'm not an expert on that issue, but I have a feeling that's not going away. All right. I think that
confirming that everything's going through as CVIS as needed. And for those that don't know, CVIS is one of the things that they do is it's the program for sponsorship of students.
Yeah.
F's and J's. So what Aaron's saying is that students are still able to get the paperwork that they need to be able to stay in status, which is extremely important.
All right. Anyway,
and with that pick as well, Aaron.
So we'll end a little early tonight, and thanks, Ari and Elissa. I don't know which combination of us will be here next week, but there will be. We will be back. Should be back Wednesday night as usual. Apologies for not giving people the heads up this week. Had a lot going on, but we want to get some of our other lawyers involved with this. So hopefully you'll start to see some new faces here. And thank you guys, and save your questions up if you want to ask for next week, and we will be back. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, all.